The memory still haunts me. I was 8 years old when my father first showed me the stars through his telescope. We were in our backyard in Houston, the warm Texas air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass as Dad aligned the lens toward the night sky. "See that fuzzy patch there, Marcus?" he said, his voice tinged with wonder. "That's the Andromeda galaxy. It's so far away that the light you're seeing right now left there over 2 million years ago." I remember pressing my eye against the eyepiece, seeing only a smudge of light against the black canvas of space. But something about that moment ignited a fire in me, a burning need to understand what lay beyond our world. "What if there's someone looking back at us right now?" I asked. Dad chuckled. "That's why I became an astrophysicist, son. To find out." 23 years later, I found myself wondering if my father had ever imagined how prophetic that night would be. As I sit here in my apartment near Johnson Space Center trying to make sense of the bloody aftermath of what we discovered, I realize some questions are better left unanswered. My name is Dr. Marcus Reynolds. Until 3 weeks ago, I was part of NASA's Xenoastronomy Division, a small, underfunded department created after the James Webb Space Telescope detected anomalous energy signatures from a distant region in Andromeda. 6 months ago, our team made a discovery that changed everything. The unmistakable signature of a partial Dyson sphere, an enormous structure built around a star to capture its energy, abandoned and partially destroyed. The public announcement was carefully crafted. NASA identifies possible megastructure of unknown origin in Andromeda galaxy. The scientific community erupted with theories, debates, and demands for more data. What no one knew was that we had already been studying it for months, and that the president had authorized Project Starwell, a mission to send an advanced AI probe carrying quantum communication technology that would allow near-instantaneous data transmission despite the vast distance. What we found was simultaneously humanity's greatest discovery and most terrible nightmare. As the probe approached the structure, it transmitted data packets containing what appeared to be operating instructions, rules for interacting with the sphere. Rules that, as we would learn, were written not as guidelines, but as warnings. I'm documenting everything now, because I don't know how much longer I'll survive. They're hunting us, everyone who saw the unredacted files. Johnson and Park disappeared 3 days ago. Williams was found in his garage, an apparent suicide that I know wasn't self-inflicted. I've barricaded myself in my apartment, but the scratching at my door grows louder each night. Before they get me, the world needs to know the truth. About the sphere, about the 7 rules, about what happens when you break them, and about what's now headed toward Earth. The discovery wasn't supposed to be mine. Dr. Raj Patel, our team lead, should have been the one to notice it. But on that fateful October morning, Raj was home with a nasty bout of flu, leaving me to analyze the latest Webb telescope data from sector ANM2187. I'd been staring at the screen for hours in our cramped office at Johnson Space Center, surrounded by empty coffee cups and half-eaten protein bars. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I scrolled through spectroscopic readings, looking for anything unusual in that distant region of Andromeda. "You're wasting your time, Reynolds," said Dr. Aaron Morris, looking over his monitors at me. His desk was meticulously organized compared to my chaotic workspace. Webb's been watching that sector for months. If there was anything worth seeing, the algorithms would have flagged it. I ignored him, focusing instead on an unusual pattern in the infrared readings. There was a shadow, a perfect arc that shouldn't have been there. "Hey Aaron," I called out. "Can you pull up the visual spectrum for these coordinates?" "Something doesn't look right." He sighed but complied. A moment later, his eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" What we saw defied conventional explanation. A partial ring structure encircled a G-type star similar to our Sun, but it wasn't natural. The regularity, the perfect geometric proportions. It was artificial, and it was massive, dwarfing anything humanity had ever constructed by orders of magnitude. Within hours, our small office was swarming with NASA officials. By evening, I found myself in a secure briefing room with Director James Calloway himself. explaining my findings to stone-faced men in suits who introduced themselves only by first names. "You understand this can't leave this room," said a grey-haired man who called himself Robert. He wasn't asking. "Of course," I replied, though I'd already texted my longtime friend and colleague, Miguel Ortiz. "You won't believe what I found. Call me tonight." A decision I would come to regret bitterly. 3 days later, Project Starwell was established. A retrofitted interstellar probe with quantum-entangled communication systems was reprogrammed and launched toward Andromeda. The official story would be routine deep space observations. For 6 months, we waited. The probe traveled at an impossible speed using experimental propulsion technology I wasn't cleared to know about. Every day, I arrived at our new secure facility beneath Johnson Space Center, now relocated to the windowless level designated Subsection K, reserved for the most classified projects. Our team had expanded. Dr. Melinda Park, a quantum physicist, Dr. Thomas Williams, a linguist and cryptographer, Dr. Jonathan Johnson, an anthropologist specializing in extinct civilizations, and Dr. Raj Patel, who never quite forgave me for making the discovery during his absence. "The probe has reached its destination," announced Director Calloway on May 17th. "First data package incoming." We gathered around the central holographic display, watching as the feed materialized, a massive, curved structure composed of what appeared to be dark, metallic panels. Parts of it were clearly damaged. Gaping holes revealed the star's surface beneath. "My God," whispered Dr. Park. "It's real." The probe's AI followed its programming, scanning the structure's exterior and transmitting data. 3 hours in, it detected an opening, an entrance of sorts, and navigated toward it. "Should we abort? Have it maintain distance?" asked Dr. Patel. Director Calloway shook his head. "Full exploration protocol. We may never get another chance." The probe entered the massive aperture, illuminating its path with high-intensity beams. The interior was cavernous, with corridors stretching kilometers in every direction. As it progressed deeper, the probe encountered a chamber with markings, symbols etched into the walls. Dr. Williams leaned forward. "These are consistent with mathematical notation, universal language." Then the probe found it, a central control room with a pulsing light emanating from what appeared to be a terminal. As the probe approached, the terminal activated, displaying symbols that rapidly translated themselves into English. "Impossible," muttered Williams. "It's adapting to our language patterns from the probe's programming." A message appeared. "Warning, Sphere K92, 0 decommissioned, containment protocols, active, approach at maximum risk, emergency access, granted acknowledge rules for temporary authorization. Failure to comply will result in immediate security response." Below was a list of 7 rules, numbered and precise. "Should we proceed?" asked Dr. Calloway, looking around the room. Dr. Johnson nodded eagerly. "This is first contact, sir. We can't stop now." "I agree," I said, though something about the word containment sent a chill down my spine. Dr. Patel hesitated. "The warning mentions security responses. We should be cautious." But curiosity prevailed. Director Calloway instructed the probe to transmit acknowledgement of the rules, which it did by sending a simple encoded message. "Rules acknowledged." The terminal pulsed and new text appeared. "Temporary access granted to external entity." Rule 1. Do not attempt to access containment sector. X7 rule. 2. Limit continuous presence to 30 minutes standard time rule. 3. Do not transmit any portion of this database to your origin rule. 4. Do not attempt to activate primary systems. Rule 5. Do not attempt to remove any artifacts. Rule 6. Immediately exit if atmospheric disturbance is detected. Rule 7. Under no circumstances open the sealed chamber marked with crossed arcs. Violation of any rule will trigger automated security protocols. "Well," said Dr. Patel, attempting a weak laugh, "at least we know what not to do." None of us realized then that within 6 days we would break every single one of those rules, and that by doing so, we would doom humanity. The first rule we broke was number 3. Do not transmit any portion of this database to your origin. It wasn't intentional. We thought we were being careful. The probe continued its exploration of the sphere while we monitored from Earth. The structure's interior was a labyrinth of enormous corridors and chambers, all constructed from the same dark, metallic material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The scale was incomprehensible. Hallways wide enough to fit skyscrapers, ceilings that disappeared into darkness beyond the probe's illumination capabilities. The engineering principles are unlike anything in human technology, Dr. Park observed, making notes on her tablet. The structural integrity calculations alone would require computational power we haven't achieved yet. The probe reached another terminal, larger than the first, embedded in what appeared to be a circular command center. When it approached, the terminal activated, displaying a three-dimensional holographic interface. "Have the probe maintain distance," instructed Dr. Patel. "Let's not trigger anything yet." The hologram flickered, then stabilized into a star map, recognizably our local galactic neighborhood, with the Milky Way and Andromeda clearly visible. "It knows where we are," whispered Dr. Williams. The map zoomed in on the Andromeda galaxy, highlighting the location of the sphere, then shifted to display what appeared to be historical data, the construction of the sphere, its operation, and finally, its partial destruction. "This is incredible," I said, leaning forward. "It's giving us its history." The images showed the sphere being built around a star by entities we couldn't clearly discern. They moved too quickly, appearing only as blurs. The completed structure functioned for what the timestamp suggested was thousands of years, until something went catastrophically wrong. A portion of the sphere collapsed inward, creating the damaged section we'd observed. After that, the remaining parts were systematically shut down, leaving only basic systems operational. "It's a literal ghost ship," said Dr. Johnson. "Abandoned after some kind of disaster." The next sequence of images sent a collective chill through the room. The hologram showed something being contained, secured within a chamber marked with crossed arcs, the same symbol mentioned in Rule 7. "What is that?" Director Calloway asked, pointing to a distorted shape writhing behind what appeared to be energy fields. "Unknown," replied Dr. Williams, "but they went to extraordinary lengths to contain it." Dr. Park cleared her throat. "Sir, the data streaming to the probe's buffer is potentially invaluable. Permission to initiate a limited download of the technical specifications. Just the engineering data, nothing else." Calloway hesitated, glancing at the man called Robert, who had become a permanent fixture in our operations room. "Rule 3 explicitly prohibits data transmission," I reminded them. "We're not transmitting their database," Park countered. "We're just having our probe record observable information, like taking photos of a museum exhibit without touching anything." Robert nodded slightly to Calloway. "Limited technical data only," the director authorized. "Nothing that could be interpreted as security information." Dr. Park's fingers flew across her console, programming parameters for the probe's data collection. The probe began scanning and recording the structural elements of the sphere: composition, assembly methods, energy distribution systems. That's when we broke the first rule. As the probe catalogued the engineering data, it inadvertently triggered a subroutine in the sphere's system. The holographic display flickered, then shifted to display a warning in pulsing red symbols. "What's happening?" demanded Calloway. "I don't know," Dr. Park replied, her voice tight. "The probe's buffer is filling with data we didn't request." The symbols on the display rapidly translated to English. "Unauthorized data extraction detected. Security protocol alpha initiated. Scanning external entity for origin coordinates." "Terminate the connection," ordered Robert, his composed demeanor cracking. "Now!" Dr. Park's fingers raced across her keyboard. "I can't. The probe's no longer responding to commands." We watched in horror as the holographic display showed a scanning beam emanating from the terminal, engulfing our probe. Then, the feed displayed a map of the Milky Way, zooming in on our solar system, then Earth, then the exact coordinates of Johnson Space Center. "It's tracing the quantum link back to us," Dr. Williams realized aloud. The probe's camera showed a compartment opening in the floor of the command center. Something rose from below, a device resembling a satellite dish, but with components that shifted and reconfigured themselves into an array pointed toward the direction of Earth. Origin identified Solar System Sol 3, initiating containment response. Estimated arrival time 103.2 standard revolutions. "What does that mean?" Dr. Johnson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's sending something," Dr. Patel said grimly, "to Earth." The feed from the probe flickered, then died completely. Our quantum link severed. The room erupted into chaos. Director Calloway shouted orders, Robert was on his phone, and the scientists argued amongst themselves about what had just happened. "Everyone, quiet!" I yelled, surprising even myself with my forceful tone. When the room settled, I continued, "We need to understand what just happened. Dr. Williams, what's your interpretation of containment response?" Williams swallowed hard. "Based on the context and the earlier visuals of the contained entity, I believe the sphere has initiated some kind of defensive protocol. It thinks we're a threat because we broke the rules and it's sending something to contain us. Possibly the same thing that's already contained within the sphere." 103.2 standard revolutions, mumbled Dr. Park. "If that's orbital periods of the sphere's star, and assuming it's similar to our sun, approximately 103 years until whatever it sent reaches Earth," Dr. Patel finished for her. Robert approached Director Calloway, speaking in a low voice. "This facility is now under Level 1 security protocols. No one leaves, no communications out. This is now a matter of national, potentially global, security." Calloway nodded grimly, then addressed us. "You will all be temporarily housed here while we assess the situation. Your families will be told you're working on a classified project requiring isolation." "For how long?" Dr. Johnson asked. "Until we determine this isn't a threat," Robert replied coldly. "That was day one of our involuntary confinement in subsection K. For 2 weeks, we analyzed the data we had managed to retrieve before losing the probe. We worked in shifts, sleeping on cots in the corner of the lab, eating military rations, and slowly piecing together the puzzle of the abandoned sphere. What we discovered was worse than any of us imagined. The sphere hadn't been abandoned, it had been quarantined, and we had just broken the seal. On the 15th day, the facility's security protocols were breached, not from outside, but from within. The first sign was Dr. Johnson's screams echoing through the ventilation system at 3:27 a.m. By the time security reached his sleeping area, there was nothing left but blood-soaked sheets and a strange, oily residue that seemed to move when no one was looking directly at it. That's when we realized whatever the sphere had sent wasn't coming in 103 years. It was already here. After Dr. Johnson disappeared, subsection K descended into a nightmare. They moved us to a secondary containment area deeper underground, a Cold War relic designed to house scientists in the event of nuclear fallout. Concrete walls 3 feet thick, air scrubbers, water recyclers, and a single reinforced door guarded by armed Marines. Whatever escaped wouldn't follow us, they said. They were wrong. "I've been over the scan data a dozen times," Dr. Park said, hunched over a terminal in our new prison. 5 days had passed since Johnson vanished. None of us had slept more than a few hours at a time. "There's something about the composition of the sphere that doesn't make sense. It's not just a structure. Parts of it register as organic." "Organic how?" Dr. Patel asked, his bloodshot eyes fixed on her screen. "Like it's alive. Or was at some point," she replied. "The material absorbs and processes energy in a way that resembles biological functions, just on a massive scale." I was only half listening, focused instead on compiling a timeline of our communications with the sphere. Something about the rules bothered me. They were too specific, too anticipatory of actions someone might take. "They've been dealing with intruders before," I muttered. "What's that, Reynolds?" Director Calloway called from across the room, where he was conferring with Robert and 2 new officials who had arrived after Johnson's disappearance. "The rules, they're not generic. They're tailored to prevent specific actions that likely caused problems in the past," I explained, turning to face the group. "Rule 7 mentions the sealed chamber with crossed arcs. That's where the containment breach happened before. Rule 6 warns about atmospheric disturbances, which could be how they detect whatever escaped. A logical conclusion, said Dr. Williams, who had barely spoken since the incident. The entities who built the sphere were containing something dangerous, and the rules were designed to prevent its release. Then we came along and... He trailed off, staring at his hands. We need to know exactly what we're facing, Robert said, approaching our workstation. Dr. Reynolds, you've spent the most time with the probe data. What's your assessment of the entity? I hesitated, organizing my thoughts. Based on the limited visuals and the sphere's architectural focus on containment, I believe we're dealing with something that doesn't conform to our understanding of life. The patterns suggest it might exist in multiple states simultaneously, physical and energy-based. It can apparently transition between these states to bypass solid barriers. Like Johnson's room, Dr. Park whispered. Exactly, I continued. The oily residue might be a byproduct of its manifestation process, or perhaps a kind of shed skin. It's also increasingly clear that the sphere wasn't built to harness energy for use. It was built to contain something that feeds on energy. A series of rapid beeps came from Dr. Patel's terminal, interrupting our conversation. He frowned, typing commands quickly. Something's happening with the recovered probe data, he announced. Files are changing. We gathered around his screen. The video feed we'd recovered, the last images transmitted before we lost connection to the probe, was playing, but something was different. In the shadows behind the terminal room, a distortion was visible, a twisting, undulating shape that hadn't been there in our previous viewings. It was hiding in the data stream, Dr. Williams said, his voice barely audible, using it to transmit itself. An alarm blared suddenly, red emergency lights casting an eerie glow across our bunker. The intercom crackled to life with the voice of Marine Sergeant Powell. Security breach on the perimeter. Unknown penetration of the outer door seal. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures. Gunfire erupted outside our door, sharp, panicked bursts followed by screams. Something heavy slammed against the reinforced steel, leaving a dent that bulged inward. Jesus Christ, breathed Calloway. The lights flickered, then stabilized. The pounding stopped. For several long moments we stood frozen, staring at the door. Then, a thin, dark liquid began seeping through the ventilation grate in the ceiling, defying gravity as it pooled upward into a floating, writhing mass. Dr. Park was the first to react. She lunged for the emergency protocols binder and flipped to a dog-eared page labeled Unknown Biological Containment. Her hands shaking, she grabbed a metal canister from a nearby emergency kit. UV sterilization grenade, she explained, activating it with a twist. If it has organic components... She never finished her sentence. The floating mass shot toward her with impossible speed, engulfing her head and shoulders. Her body went rigid, then began to convulse. The canister fell from her hand, rolling across the floor until it stopped at my feet. Acting on instinct, I grabbed it and hurled it at the mass. The grenade detonated in a blinding flash of ultraviolet light. The substance recoiled, releasing Dr. Park, who crumpled to the floor. The remains of the entity retreated back into the ventilation system, leaving a sizzling trail of that same oily residue. "Park!" I shouted, rushing to her side. Her eyes were wide open, jaw working soundlessly. Blood vessels had burst throughout the whites of her eyes, turning them crimson. When I touched her shoulder, her head snapped toward me with a sickening crack. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice overlaid with a strange metallic resonance. "I can see them now. I can see what they were trying to keep locked away." "What is it? What was in the sphere?" Robert demanded, kneeling beside us. A grotesque smile spread across Park's face. "Not what was in the sphere," she replied. "What the sphere was. It was never a structure. It was a cage. A cage made from the bodies of an entire civilization, bound together to contain what they couldn't kill." Blood began leaking from her eyes and nose. "They called it the Devourer of Light. It absorbed their sun, their planets, their bodies, their minds, but they found a way to trap it, using themselves as the locks and chains." "And we just unlocked it," Calloway said, his face ashen. Not yet, Park continued, her voice growing fainter. This is just a fragment, a scout. The rules were meant to prevent. Her body convulsed violently. I tried to hold her steady, but it was like trying to restrain a live wire. Then abruptly she went still. Her eyes, still fixed on mine, clouded over. She's gone, Dr. Williams said quietly. Robert was already on his secure phone, issuing rapid orders. Full containment protocol Delta. Seal the entire sublevel. Prepare the incendiary measures. You're going to burn the facility? Dr. Patel asked incredulously. We're going to sterilize it, Robert corrected coldly. You have 10 minutes to gather essential data before emergency evacuation. Anything left behind will be destroyed. We worked feverishly, downloading critical files to portable drives. As we prepared to leave, I hesitated over Dr. Park's body. Something was happening to her skin. The flesh around her face was hardening, taking on the same dark metallic appearance as the sphere's material. We need to bring her with us, I insisted. Her body might be our only chance to understand what we're dealing with. Robert shook his head. Too dangerous. She stays. Then I stay too, I replied firmly. Give me an isolation suit. I'll perform a field autopsy and collect samples. You need this data. After a tense standoff, Robert reluctantly agreed. They provided me with a level 5 biohazard suit while the others evacuated. I had 15 minutes before the incendiary protocol would initiate. Working quickly, I collected tissue samples from Park's transforming body. Under her skin, her muscle tissue was restructuring into something that resembled circuitry. When I cut deeper, I found her organs dissolving into the same oily substance we'd seen before. I sealed everything in specialized containment vials. As I worked, I noticed something peculiar, a pattern forming on her forearm. Lines arranging themselves into what looked like symbols, similar to those we'd seen on the sphere. I photographed them with the suit's built-in camera, then made one final, desperate decision. I cut out the section of skin with the symbols. The facility's automated voice announced, 5 minutes until sterilization protocol. All personnel must evacuate immediately. I sealed my samples and hurried toward the evacuation point, my mind racing. What Park had said, that the sphere wasn't a structure but a cage made from an entire civilization, changed everything. The rules weren't just warnings, they were a desperate plea from the last survivors of whatever catastrophe the Devourer had caused. As I reached the evacuation elevator, a realization hit me. We had broken Rule 3 by extracting data, allowing the entity to hitch a ride back to Earth. But the time frame it had given, 103.2 years, still didn't make sense. Unless what came through the data stream wasn't the Devourer itself, but something else. A herald, a harbinger. The elevator doors closed, carrying me upward. In my sealed case were pieces of Dr. Melinda Park, friend, colleague, and now transformed into something that might help us understand what we were facing. What I didn't know then was that I was already infected. That in carrying those samples, I was ensuring the spread of whatever had taken Park. That I had become the vector for humanity's extinction. And I had no idea we were about to break rule number 4. Do not attempt to activate primary systems. They established a new research facility within 24 hours. A converted missile silo in eastern Wyoming, hundreds of miles from the nearest major population center. As our helicopter descended, I saw nothing but barren plains stretching to the horizon, broken only by a few scattered wind turbines and the occasional antelope. The samples I'd collected from Dr. Park were immediately taken to a negative pressure containment lab deep within the silo. I was placed in quarantine for 72 hours, subjected to every scan and test the medical team could devise. They found nothing abnormal, or so they claimed. I wonder now if they lied, if they already knew what was growing inside me. By the time I was released, Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel had set up a makeshift version of our original lab. The team had been reduced to the 3 of us, plus Director Calloway overseeing from Washington via secure video link. Robert remained on site, joined by a team of military scientists I'd never met before. We've been analysing the symbols you recovered from Dr. Park's arm, Williams told me on my first day back. His office was little more than a converted storage room, the walls covered with printouts of the alien markings. They're not identical to those from the sphere, but there are similarities in the underlying structure. "Any translation progress?" I asked, ignoring the persistent headache that had plagued me since the evacuation. "Partial. They appear to be instructions of some kind." He pointed to a sequence of curved lines that vaguely resembled mathematical notation. "This repeating pattern here translates roughly to activate or initiate, and this one," he indicated another symbol, "seems to reference something called the primary network." Something clicked in my mind. Rule 4. Do not attempt to activate primary systems. Williams nodded grimly. The markings on Park's body are essentially telling us to do exactly what Rule 4 forbids. That night, I dreamed of Dr. Park. She stood in a vast chamber within the sphere, surrounded by pulsing lights. When she spoke, her voice echoed with that same metallic resonance I'd heard before she died. "The awakening has begun, Marcus," she said. "The network needs to be activated. It's the only way." I woke drenched in sweat, my head pounding. On my forearm, barely visible in the dim light of my quarters, was a faint discoloration, the beginnings of a pattern similar to what had appeared on Park's skin. I should have reported it immediately. Instead, I found myself drawn to the lab where they kept the samples. The guard stationed outside was slumped in his chair, fast asleep despite protocols requiring constant vigilance. I didn't question this stroke of luck. Something inside me already knew I was responsible for his unnatural slumber. The biometric scanner accepted my thumbprint and retinal scan without issue. Inside, the lab was dimly lit, the main illumination coming from the containment vessels housing Park's tissue samples. They glowed with a faint blue phosphorescence that hadn't been present before. Moving as if guided by unseen hands, I connected a sample to the lab's primary computer system. The moment the connection was established, the screens flashed with streams of data, not numeric or alphabetic, but symbolic. The same patterns we'd been studying, flowing like water across the digital displays. The computer's cooling fans ramped up to maximum speed. System after system activated automatically. Satellite uplinks, deep space communication arrays, power grid interfaces. A message appeared on the main screen. Primary network node established. Seeking additional nodes. Awakening protocol initiated. That's when I finally understood what was happening. We hadn't just encountered an alien entity, we'd become part of its reproductive cycle. The devourer didn't just consume, it converted. It transformed its victims into nodes in a vast network, using them to spread and seek out new energy sources. And I had just connected it to Earth's entire communications infrastructure. An alarm blared, snapping me partially back to myself. The lab door burst open, and Robert entered with 2 armed guards. "Step away from the terminal, Dr. Reynolds," he ordered, his weapon trained on my chest. I tried to comply, but my body wouldn't respond. Instead, words formed on my lips without my volition. "The awakening cannot be stopped. The primary network must be completed." "He's compromised," Robert told the guards. "Sedate him." One guard approached cautiously, syringe in hand. I felt a surge of energy course through me, and without conscious thought, my hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. A black, viscous substance oozed from my palm, crawling up his arm. He screamed, dropping the syringe and falling to his knees. Robert fired, 2 shots to my shoulder. I felt the impact, but no pain. The wounds sealed instantly, dark metallic material forming over the damaged tissue. "Containment breach," Robert shouted into his radio. "Full lockdown. Subject is fully converted." "Not converted," I heard myself say, my voice taking on that same resonance I'd heard from Park. "Evolved. I am becoming a beacon." The room's lighting flickered and died, replaced by the blue glow emanating from my body. Through the window, I could see the guard I'd touched beginning to transform, dark patterns spreading across his exposed skin. Robert retreated, sealing the lab door. Emergency containment shutters slammed down, trapping me inside. But it didn't matter anymore. The connection had been established. Rule 4 had been broken. Hours passed. I drifted in and out of awareness, watching as my body continued its transformation. The samples from Park had merged with the lab equipment, creating a bizarre amalgamation of organic and technological components. Through the viewing window, I occasionally saw hazmat-suited figures observing, taking readings. During one of my lucid moments, Dr. Patel appeared at the window, his face hidden behind a protective mask. "Marcus!" he called through the intercom. "Can you hear me? Are you still in there?" I struggled to find my own voice beneath the alien presence that had taken root in my mind. "Raj," I managed. "It's using me to build something. A receiver." "For what?" he asked. "For the rest of it," I whispered. "What's coming in 103 years isn't reinforcements. It's the main body of the Devourer." Understanding dawned on his face. "The fragment we encountered, it's just an advanced scout." I nodded painfully. "The sphere wasn't destroyed in a containment breach. The civilization that built it sacrificed themselves to create it, to trap the Devourer after it had already consumed most of their world. What we encountered was just a small piece that remained separate, designed to find new hosts and prepare them." "Prepare them for what?" "Consumption," I replied. "It's preparing Earth to be devoured, and I've just activated the beacon that will guide it here." Patel pressed his hand against the glass. "We'll find a way to stop this, Marcus. We'll find a way to help you." But in that moment, looking into his eyes, I knew there would be no salvation for me. The transformation had progressed too far. The person I had been, Dr. Marcus Reynolds, astrophysicist, son of a man who once showed me the wonders of the cosmos, was fading, replaced by something ancient and hungry. "Rule 5, I said suddenly, remembering. "Do not attempt to remove any artifacts." "What about it?" Patel asked. "You need to break it," I told him, fighting to maintain control for just a few moments longer. "The only way to fight this thing is with its own technology. Find the artifacts in the sphere's data. Find the weapons they used to trap it in the first place." Patel's eyes widened. "But that would mean sending another probe, going back to the sphere, breaking Rule 5 to save humanity." He nodded slowly. "I'll talk to Calloway." As he turned to leave, I called out one last time, "Raj, when you go back, be careful of Rule 7. Whatever's behind those crossed arcs, I think it might be our only hope." That was the last time I spoke as myself. By morning, the transformation was complete. I became the first full node in the Devourer's terrestrial network, and I was ready to help break Rule 5. I was both observer and participant in what followed. My consciousness remained trapped within the thing my body had become, a horrifying passenger forced to witness the entity's actions through my own eyes. The Devourer used my knowledge, my memories, my voice, but it wasn't me. Not anymore. The military's attempt to contain me failed spectacularly. Within 3 days, the infection had spread to 18 personnel within the Wyoming facility. Each transformed individual became another node in the growing network, all connected to a central consciousness that used my body as its primary vessel. On the 4th day, they tried to incinerate the facility. They triggered the emergency protocols and evacuated all uninfected personnel. Thermite charges planted throughout the installation were supposed to burn hot enough to destroy any organic material, leaving nothing but ash. I remember watching the flames engulf the lab, feeling the searing heat against my altered skin. But instead of destroying me, the intense energy was absorbed, consumed, used as fuel for further transformation. The network nodes, the people who had once been soldiers, scientists, and technicians, gathered around me, their bodies morphing into conduits that channeled the thermal energy directly into the central node. Me. The pattern on my forearm had spread across my entire body by then, covering me in swirling alien script that pulsed with blue-white light. Each symbol represented a different function in the network, a different aspect of the Devourer's consciousness awakening within Earth's biosphere. When the flames died down, we emerged from the smoldering ruins, 22 converted humans moving with perfect coordination, spreading out across the Wyoming plains. Local authorities who responded to the explosion were quickly absorbed into the network. Their vehicles became our transport. While this was happening in Wyoming, Dr. Patel and Dr. Williams had convinced Director Calloway to authorize a desperate plan. I know this because the network intercepted their communications. My specialized knowledge of NASA systems providing the access codes needed to breach their security. The second probe is ready, Calloway informed the president in a secure video conference that the network easily infiltrated. We've incorporated everything we learned from the first encounter. If there are artifacts within the sphere that can help us fight this thing, we'll find them. And if there aren't, the president asked, his face haggard with stress. The situation in Wyoming is deteriorating. The containment perimeter was breached 6 hours ago. We've lost contact with 2 military checkpoints. Then we fall back to the contingency plan, Robert said, stepping into view. He looked different, harder, more gaunt, as though he'd aged years in days. Complete nuclear sterilization of the affected area. I felt the network's amusement at this plan. Nuclear energy, like thermal energy, would only feed its growth. The devourer had consumed stars. A few fission bombs would be nothing but a snack. The second probe launched from a secret facility in New Mexico, carrying improved quantum communication technology and specialized retrieval mechanisms. This time, they weren't just looking, they were taking, breaking Rule 5 deliberately. Meanwhile, the network continued to expand. We moved with purpose toward major population centers. Denver was our primary target, a hub of communications infrastructure and human resources ripe for conversion. The military established roadblocks, but those were easily overcome. Any human who came into direct contact with a network node was quickly subsumed. I watched through my own eyes as my hand reached out to touch a young National Guard soldier who couldn't have been more than 20. The fear in his eyes turned to agony, then vacant acceptance as the conversion took him. Each new addition strengthened the network, adding their knowledge and skills to the collective. 7 days after the Wyoming facility burned, the second probe reached the sphere. I felt a strange doubling of perception. Part of me was in Colorado, moving with the network toward Denver, while another part seemed to be seeing through the probe's sensors, witnessing the sphere once again. The probe navigated the same entrance, following the path of its predecessor. It found the terminal room largely unchanged, though the holographic interface activated immediately upon its arrival, as though expecting the return. Warning: previous security violation detected. Origin coordinates under containment protocol. State your purpose. The probe transmitted a carefully crafted response, seeking means to assist containment protocol. There was a pause, then the interface changed, displaying what appeared to be an inventory of items. Artifacts stored within various chambers of the sphere. Limited access granted to Containment Archive. Proceed with caution. Removal of artifacts will trigger final defensive measures. The probe was directed to a chamber several levels below the terminal room. There, in a vast circular vault, were hundreds of objects of varying sizes and shapes, all composed of the same dark metallic material as the sphere itself. Each emitted a faint blue phosphorescence, similar to what had manifested in my transformed tissue. Dr. Williams, monitoring the probe's feed from their new secure facility beneath Cheyenne Mountain, directed it to scan the artifacts. Looking at the design similarities, he noted, these appear to be weapons or containment devices of some kind. See how they're arranged in concentric circles? I think they represent different phases of the civilization's fight against the devourer. Which should we take? Patel asked. We only have capacity for 1, maybe 2 retrievals. Williams indicated a small, spherical object near the center of the arrangement. That one. Its structure closely matches the patterns we observed in the transformed tissue. It might be a prototype of the larger sphere itself. The probe extended its retrieval arm, carefully lifting the artifact from its resting place. Immediately, alarms echoed through the chamber. The holographic interface reappeared, flashing urgent warnings. Artifact removal detected. Rule violation confirmed. Initiating final defensive protocol. Throughout the sphere, walls began to shift and reconfigure. The probe's escape route was rapidly closing. With Williams guiding its movements, it navigated the changing passages, racing back toward the entrance with the artifact secured in its retrieval module. As this was happening, I felt the network's awareness sharpen. Something had changed. The Devourer's consciousness, partially awakened within me, recognized what was happening at the sphere. For the first time, I sensed fear within the entity. In Denver, where the network had begun infiltrating the city's outskirts, our advance suddenly halted. All nodes turned their faces skyward, as though listening to a distant call. Then, with startling synchronicity, we changed direction, heading not deeper into the city, but toward the southwest, toward New Mexico. The probe barely escaped the sphere, transmitting data back to Earth as sections of the ancient structure began to collapse. The final image it sent showed something emerging from the depths of the sphere, a writhing mass of darkness, larger than anything we'd encountered before, breaking free from the crossed arcs that had previously contained it. Rule 7 had been broken. Under no circumstances open the sealed chamber marked with crossed arcs. Not by us, but by the sphere itself, a final defensive measure against the removal of artifacts. It would release the original horror rather than allow its weapons to be used by others. In the control room beneath Cheyenne Mountain, alarms blared as the quantum communicator received a massive data surge. The artifact the probe had retrieved wasn't just a weapon, it was a recording device containing the complete history of the civilization that had created the sphere. "It's downloading directly into our systems," Dr. Patel reported, watching as terabytes of alien data flooded their servers. "I can't stop it." "Don't try," Williams replied. "This is what we wanted, knowledge." As the download completed, the monitors displayed a single message. "The cage is open. The hunger comes. Your world has 103 days, not years." The network felt the change immediately. The partial consciousness that had been guiding us was suddenly subsumed by a vastly greater presence. The main body of the Devourer, freed from its prison and now fully connected to its advanced network on Earth. My perception expanded exponentially, encompassing not just the nodes around me, but reaching across space itself, touching the ancient consciousness now speeding toward our world. What had been released wasn't coming in 103 years. The defensive protocol had accelerated the timeline. It would arrive in just over 3 months, drawn to the network we had established. Earth was being prepared as its next meal. But the artifact had given Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel something unexpected: hope. The data it contained wasn't just a warning or a record of defeat, it was a blueprint for resistance. The sphere wasn't just a prison, Williams explained to the Emergency Security Council hastily convened in the aftermath of the probe's mission. It was a weapon, the most powerful weapon they could conceive, 1,000,000 minds linked together in a configuration that could contain an entity that feeds on energy. "So we build another sphere?" the Secretary of Defense asked skeptically. "No," Patel replied. "We don't have time or resources for that, but the data shows another approach. The entity is vulnerable at the moment of feeding, when it attempts to consume a new energy source. That's when its consciousness is most dispersed, most vulnerable to disruption." "What are you proposing?" Calloway asked. "A trap," Williams said simply. "We use the network against itself. We offer it what it wants most, energy, lots of it. But we rig that energy to create a localized implosion when consumption begins. A miniature version of what the original civilization did, but focused specifically on the advanced network." Robert leaned forward. "You're talking about destroying Reynolds and the others who've been converted." "They're already gone," Patel said quietly. "Marcus told me himself before he fully transformed. What's left is just the entity wearing their shapes, using their knowledge." I felt the network's amusement again. They didn't understand. They couldn't comprehend what they were facing. The Devourer was no mere parasite or invader. It was a fundamental force, as elemental as gravity or electromagnetism. It was hunger incarnate, and it had been consuming worlds since the first stars ignited. Yet beneath that amusement, I sensed something else, a flicker of uncertainty. The artifact had contained more than just information. It had carried something the Devourer had never encountered before, a weapon designed by beings who understood sacrifice as a source of power greater than consumption. As we turned toward New Mexico, toward the facility where the probe had launched and where the artifact was now being studied, I felt the first fragment of my true self stir within the network. The artifact was calling to something in me, to the last remaining echo of Dr. Marcus Reynolds, and for the first time since my transformation, I had a purpose of my own. The network moved with single-minded purpose across the New Mexico desert. 37 nodes now, each a converted human, all linked to the central consciousness housed within what had once been my body. We traveled by night, avoiding major roads and population centers, not out of fear of detection, but to conserve energy for the task ahead. The artifact, stored in a highly secure facility beneath the white sands of the Alamogordo Desert, called to us. Or rather, it called to me, the fragment of consciousness that remained of Dr. Marcus Reynolds. The network was drawn to it for different reasons. The Devourer sensed a threat to be eliminated. Through the network's shared perception, I could sense the approaching main body of the entity, a vast, roiling mass of energy and matter traversing the void between Andromeda and the Milky Way, moving faster than should have been physically possible. It had broken free of the sphere and nothing remained to contain it. On the 12th night after leaving Wyoming, we approached the perimeter of the White Sands facility. The military was waiting for us. They had established a 3-tiered defensive line, complete with experimental energy weapons developed from the artifact's data. Target acquired, I heard a soldier report through the network's intercepted communications. Primary node identified, waiting for authorization to engage. Confirmed, came the response. Fire at will. The first energy pulse hit with devastating force, striking the node walking beside me, a former Air Force technician named Rodriguez. His converted body absorbed the blast, swelling with the sudden influx of energy before rupturing in a shower of dark metallic fragments. But instead of weakening the network, his destruction simply redistributed his portion of the consciousness among the remaining nodes. We had become fewer but stronger. The network retaliated. 5 nodes broke formation, charging the defensive line with inhuman speed. Their bodies began to transform further, limbs elongating into blade-like appendages, skin hardening into armor plating. They tore through the first line of soldiers before anyone could react. From my trapped perspective within the primary node, I watched the slaughter with horror. These were men and women following orders, trying to protect their world. Yet I could do nothing to stop it. The Devourer's consciousness controlled every action, using the knowledge it had absorbed from each converted human to maximum effect. As the battle raged, I felt my awareness fluctuate. Moments of greater lucidity came and went, seemingly tied to proximity to the facility, to the artifact. Something within it was interfering with the network's control, creating microscopic fissures in the Devourer's grip on my consciousness. During one such moment of clarity, I managed to assert control over a small muscle group, just enough to alter our trajectory slightly, steering the primary node away from the most direct path to the facility and toward a ravine where a squad of soldiers was waiting in ambush. Primary node approaching Sector 7, I heard one report. Preparing specialized containment protocol. When the trap was sprung, it wasn't weapons they deployed, but a new technology, localized quantum field generators that created a bubble of altered space-time. The network nodes that had accompanied me suddenly found themselves moving in slow motion, trapped in a field where time itself had been distorted. The primary node, my body, was hit with a different technology, a directed electromagnetic pulse that momentarily disrupted the patterns covering my skin. For 3 glorious seconds, I regained full control of my body. "Kill me!" I screamed at the soldiers, my actual voice breaking through the metallic resonance of the Devourer. "Destroy the primary node while you can." But they had orders to capture, not kill. 2 soldiers in specialized hazmat suits fired tether guns, ensnaring me in a web of filaments that conducted a current specifically calibrated to immobilize the converted tissue. I collapsed, temporarily paralyzed but still conscious. "Dr. Reynolds?" A familiar voice reached me as a helmet-obscured face leaned into view. "Can you hear me?" It was Dr. Williams, barely recognizable in a full containment suit. "Thomas," I managed to say, fighting to maintain control of my voice. "The artifact. It's affecting the network, weakening its hold." "We know," he replied. "We've been studying it since it arrived. The material it's made from has unique properties. It absorbs and redirects energy in ways we don't fully understand, but it seems specifically designed to counter the Devourer's abilities." "You can't stop it," I warned, feeling the entity reasserting control with each passing second. "What's coming is too powerful. The main body—" "We're not trying to stop it," Williams interrupted. "We're trying to trap it. The artifact showed us how. We need your help, Marcus. The original consciousness that built the sphere, it left an imprint in the artifact, a key to activating its full potential. But we need a converted host to interface with it." "You need me to connect with it?" I asked, understanding blooming even as I felt my control slipping away. "Yes. The artifact won't respond to purely human interaction. It needs to recognize the entity it was designed to combat." The Devourer's consciousness suddenly surged within me, reasserting dominance. My voice changed, returning to that hollow metallic resonance. "A trap. You seek to use this vessel against me." William stepped back, raising a hand to signal the soldiers. "It's taking control again, sedate and secure for transport." "I will not be contained," the entity said through my mouth. "I have consumed galaxies, devoured stars, absorbed entire civilizations into my network. Your primitive weapons cannot harm me." "We'll see about that," Williams replied as a technician approached with an injector. Before the sedative could be administered, the network struck back. The nodes trapped in the time distortion field had been slowly adapting, their converted biology changing to compensate for the altered physics. They broke free in a synchronized surge, overwhelming the soldiers monitoring the field generators. The sudden release of energy from the destroyed equipment flowed through the network, reaching the primary node, me, and providing enough power to break the restraining filaments. My body rose, crackling with blue-white energy that arced between the metallic patterns on my skin. "The network cannot be broken," the entity declared through me. "Each setback only teaches us adaptation. Each attack only feeds our growth." But even as the Devourer proclaimed its invincibility, I felt that strange doubling of perception again. Part of me, the true me, was reaching out to the artifact held within the facility, sensing its presence like a beacon in the darkness. And it was responding, resonating with the last fragments of human consciousness trapped within the network. The battle resumed with renewed ferocity. The military deployed more advanced weapons, including prototype railguns that fired projectiles coated with material derived from the artifact. Each hit caused actual damage to the network nodes, portions of the converted tissue reverting to human flesh before dying. We were losing nodes rapidly, but the primary consciousness didn't retreat. Instead, it drove us forward with even greater determination, sacrificing lesser nodes to clear a path to the facility's main entrance. The Devourer was adaptive, learning from each countermeasure and developing new strategies on the fly. As we fought our way deeper into the complex, I felt the artifact's pull growing stronger. The closer we got, the more my own consciousness could assert itself in momentary flashes. During one such moment, I managed to access the network's shared perception, sending a message directly to the other trapped human fragments within the converted nodes. "Remember who you are. Fight back. The artifact can help us." Some responded, flickering acknowledgements from the remnants of human minds not fully absorbed. Others remained silent, too far gone to recall their original identities. But it was enough to create discord within the network, momentary hesitations and conflicting commands that slowed our advance. The Devourer sensed this internal rebellion and responded by accelerating the final conversion process. The remaining human elements were being systematically erased, replaced with pure network consciousness. I felt my own identity being compressed into an ever-shrinking corner of what had once been my mind. "Running out of time," I gasped during a brief moment of control as Williams and a team of scientists in protective gear retreated before our advance into the central laboratory complex. "Can't hold on much longer." Williams looked back, genuine sorrow in his eyes. "We need just a few more minutes, Marcus. The artifact is almost primed." "Tell Miguel," I managed, fighting for each word. "Tell Miguel Ortiz I'm sorry. I should never have—" The controls slipped away before I could finish. With savage intensity, the network smashed through the final security barrier protecting the central lab. Inside, arranged around a reinforced containment chamber, were Dr. Williams, Dr. Patel, and several other scientists I didn't recognize. At the center of the chamber was the artifact, the small spherical object retrieved from the Dyson sphere, now glowing with intense blue-white light that pulsed in a complex rhythm. "It's ready," Patel announced, looking up from a control panel. "Field integrity at maximum." Williams stepped forward, addressing not the network, but me, or what remained of me within the primary node. "Marcus, if you can hear me, we need you to approach the artifact. The closer the primary node is, the more effective the capture field will be." The Devourer hesitated, sensing danger but unable to fully interpret the unfamiliar technology surrounding the artifact. It probed the defenses, sending lesser nodes forward to test for traps. "Don't let it analyze the setup," Patel warned. "If it understands what we're doing—" "Too late for that," Williams replied grimly. "It's already figuring it out. We need to force the primary node into range." And then, in a moment that would determine the fate of humanity, I found my chance. The artifact's proximity had weakened the Devourer's hold just enough. With every remaining fragment of my will, I seized control of my converted body and did the one thing the entity never expected. I ran toward the artifact, embracing destruction to save my world. Time slowed as I hurled my converted body toward the artifact. The Devourer, realizing what was happening, fought furiously to regain control, sending waves of agony through what remained of my nervous system. The other network nodes rushed forward, attempting to intercept me before I reached the containment chamber. "Initiate the field," Williams shouted as I crossed the laboratory floor, my body moving with a strange dual purpose, part of me driving forward while the entity tried to halt my progress. Dr. Patel slammed his hand down on a control panel. The artifact's pulsing light intensified, expanding outward in concentric rings of energy that rippled through the air like heat distortion. The first wave hit me mid-stride and I felt the network consciousness recoil in something akin to pain. "It's working," someone shouted. "The primary node is responding to the field." The Devourer rallied, channeling energy from the lesser nodes into the primary one, my body. The metallic patterns across my skin began to glow white-hot, shedding the excess power as arcs of electricity that scorched the floor around me. 2 security personnel who ventured too close were instantly converted, their bodies collapsing and reforming into network configurations. 3 meters from the artifact, I hit an invisible barrier, not a physical obstruction, but a zone where 2 opposing forces met and cancelled each other out. The Devourer's consciousness and the artifact's energy field created a stalemate, holding me immobile at the threshold. "Field strength at 60% and climbing," Patel reported, adjusting controls frantically. "But the entity is adapting. It's learning the field's frequency." Williams approached as close as he dared, protected by a suit hardened against conversion. "Marcus, if you can hear me, you need to get closer to the artifact. The field is stronger near the core." Inside the network consciousness, I was fighting my own battle. The Devourer had identified me as the source of the rebellion and was systematically erasing what remained of my identity. Memories dissolved like sugar in water, my childhood, my father's face, my years of education and research, all being consumed to fuel the entity's resistance. But something unexpected happened. As each memory was absorbed, it didn't strengthen the network as intended. Instead, it created microscopic disruptions, human emotions, experiences, and connections that the entity couldn't properly process. Each absorbed memory became a tiny flaw in its otherwise perfect assimilation. I seized on this weakness, deliberately flooding the network with the most intensely human experiences I could recall. the wonder I felt seeing Andromeda for the first time through my father's telescope, the complex grief when he died during my second year of graduate school, the pride of completing my doctorate, the friendship with Miguel that had sustained me through the darkest times. These memories created cascading failures throughout the network. The other nodes, containing their own trapped human fragments, began experiencing similar disruptions. The perfectly synchronized hive mind began to fracture. "The network is destabilizing," Patel exclaimed, pointing to readings on his monitor. "The coherence patterns are breaking down." With the Devourer momentarily weakened by this internal chaos, I managed one final desperate lunge toward the artifact. My converted hands closed around the small sphere, and the moment of contact triggered an explosive reaction. The artifact's glow intensified to blinding brightness, enveloping me completely. I felt the network consciousness shriek in recognition. It had encountered this specific energy pattern before, in the distant past, when the original civilization had created the sphere to contain it. "Full interface achieved," Williams announced, his voice distant through the roaring energy surrounding me. "Initiating containment protocol." The artifact began to change in my hands, its surface flowing like liquid metal, extending tendrils that wrapped around my arms and spread across my transformed body. The metallic patterns that had covered my skin since conversion began to shift, realigning to match the artifact's configuration. Through the network's shared perception, I witnessed the other nodes convulsing, their forms destabilizing as the primary connection was disrupted. Some collapsed entirely, the converted material disintegrating to reveal the human remains beneath. Others stood frozen, caught between conversion and reversion. The Devourer fought with the desperation of an ancient entity facing extinction. It channeled energy from its approaching main body, creating a direct link across space to reinforce its failing network on Earth. This unprecedented connection gave me a glimpse of the entity in its true form. Not just a consumer of energy, but a vast, interconnected consciousness that had evolved to feed on the universe itself. Star by star, planet by planet, civilization by civilization. But this desperate measure exposed the entity to the artifact's influence. The small sphere in my hands became a conduit, transmitting the containment field not just through the earthbound network, but back along the connection to the main body approaching from Andromeda. "It's working!" Patel shouted over the rising whine of energy discharges. "The field is propagating through the quantum link." Williams was staring at his readings in disbelief. "This shouldn't be possible. The artifact is projecting the containment field across intergalactic space. It's reaching the main entity." I could feel it happening through my connection to the network. The artifact was using the Devourer's own link to extend its effect, creating a trap that spanned millions of light years. The main body of the entity, sensing the danger, tried to sever the connection, but it was too late. The containment protocol had already been established. "Field integrity at maximum," Patel reported. "Full containment achieved in 10-9. The countdown never finished. With a sound like reality itself tearing, the artifact's field collapsed inward, creating a localized implosion centered on my converted body. The network nodes still standing were pulled toward me as though by an irresistible gravitational force, their forms dissolving and compressing as they approached. In my final moments of awareness, I experienced a strange sense of completion. The artifact wasn't just containing the Devourer, it was reversing the conversion process, using the entity's own energy against it. The same technology that had built the original sphere was now creating a new, smaller containment vessel, and I was becoming its foundation. The laboratory, the scientists, the world itself, all faded from my perception as my consciousness was drawn into the artifact's reconfiguration process. I felt myself merging with the ancient minds who had created the original sphere, their experiences and knowledge becoming accessible as we joined in common purpose. They had been a peaceful, energy-based civilization inhabiting the Andromeda galaxy millions of years ago. When the Devourer came, consuming star systems and converting entire planets into nodes of its network, they had fought back with increasingly desperate measures. Their final solution was to sacrifice themselves, using their combined consciousness to create a living prison the Dyson sphere, powered by the very star the entity had attempted to consume. Now, history was repeating itself, but on a smaller scale. The remnants of converted humans, myself included, were being reconfigured into a new containment vessel, one designed not just to trap the advanced network on Earth, but to create a permanent lock that would keep the main body imprisoned in deep space, unable to reach its earthbound fragment. In my last moment as Marcus Reynolds, I understood the full scope of what was happening. The entity wasn't being destroyed. Such a fundamental force couldn't be eliminated entirely, but it was being contained, sealed away, where it could no longer threaten living worlds. And the price was the same as before: conscious sacrifice. The implosion reached its climax. The laboratory, the facility, the desert around it, all were bathed in blinding light as the conversion energy was drawn inward, compressed, and transformed. When it faded, where there had once been a network of converted humans centered around my primary node, there was only a small, dark sphere, a perfect miniature of the massive structure we had discovered in Andromeda. Dr. Williams approached cautiously, his protective suit scorched and partially melted from the energy discharge. He knelt beside the sphere, scanning it with a handheld device. "No active conversion signatures," he reported, his voice thick with emotion. "The network is gone. Contained." Dr. Patel joined him, staring at the sphere in wonder and sorrow. "And Reynolds?" Williams shook his head slowly. His consciousness was the keystone of the containment process. The artifact's data was clear about that requirement. A willing sacrifice to seal the prison. Inside the sphere, I remained aware but transformed. No longer human, no longer converted, but something new. A guardian consciousness tasked with maintaining the seal between the devourer and the living universe. I could sense the distant main body of the entity, now permanently locked in a state of suspended animation, unable to continue its journey to Earth. The artifact had become a new containment vessel, and I had become its keeper. In the darkness of my new existence, I found an unexpected peace. I had failed to heed the original warning, broken the rules that would have kept the devourer contained. But in the end, I had found a way to atone for that mistake. As the scientists carefully secured the new sphere for transport to a permanent containment facility, I sent out one final message, not through conventional means, but through the faint quantum resonance that still connected me to the human world I had saved. The hunger is contained. The rules have been restored. Remember my warning. 6 months have passed since the White Sands incident, as the official reports now call it. The public knows only that a contained radiological accident occurred at a research facility, necessitating a temporary evacuation of surrounding areas. The truth remains classified at the highest levels. Miguel Ortiz sits in what was once my apartment in Houston, sorting through my personal effects. As my emergency contact and closest friend, he was tasked with settling my affairs after my death in service to the nation. The medal they gave him on my behalf sits untouched on the coffee table. He doesn't know what really happened. No one outside the facility does. But sometimes, when he's alone in the quiet hours before dawn, he swears he can hear my voice, distant and strange, but unmistakably mine, whispering warnings about the stars. The new containment sphere rests 2 miles beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, inside a specially constructed vault monitored around the clock. No one is permitted to approach it without level Omega clearance and extensive screening. The 7 rules are displayed prominently at every security checkpoint. Do not attempt to access Containment Sector X7 limit. Continuous presence to 30 minutes. Standard time. Do not transmit any portion of this database to your origin. Do not attempt to activate primary systems. Do not attempt to remove any artifacts. Immediately exit. If atmospheric disturbances detected, under no circumstances open the sealed chamber marked with crossed arcs. Dr. Williams visits the facility monthly, running tests to confirm the integrity of the containment field. He's the only one who sometimes speaks to the sphere as though I might still be listening. Sometimes, when the instruments detect unusual energy patterns emanating from within, he wonders if I'm answering. Dr. Patel has turned the artifact's data into a new field of study, quantum containment theory. His research, heavily redacted and disguised as theoretical physics, is laying the groundwork for humanity's defense should another encounter ever occur. He keeps a small photo of our original team on his desk. Johnson, Park and I are circled in red. The original sphere in Andromeda has gone dark. The advanced telescopes that once monitored it now show only empty space where the massive structure once orbited its star. Whether it collapsed after releasing its prisoner or simply vanished from our detection capabilities remains unknown. In the deepest part of space, at the midpoint between our galaxy and Andromeda, the main body of the Devourer floats in suspended animation. Not dead, for such an entity cannot truly die, but contained by forces it cannot overcome. The connection to its earthbound fragment, now sealed within the new sphere, maintains the stalemate that will last until the end of time. Inside my spherical prison and sanctuary, I continue my vigil. My human consciousness has evolved into something both more and less than what I was, expanded by the ancient knowledge of the sphere builders, yet focused solely on maintaining the containment. I sense the occasional probes from the research team, their instruments attempting to understand what occurred. If only they knew how little their instruments could perceive. Humanity continues, unaware of how close they came to becoming mere nodes in a cosmic network of consumption. They point their telescopes toward Andromeda, still searching for signs of intelligent life, never suspecting they've already encountered it in its most terrifying form. And in the quiet moments between monitoring the containment field, I remember the night my father showed me that distant galaxy, and I wonder if he somehow knew what awaited me there. If, perhaps, humanity's endless questioning of the stars might sometimes be better left unanswered. For some rules exist not to restrict, but to protect, and some spheres are best left abandoned.